I just don't know if it's the perfect book for me, and I'm loving the writing. Like, the quality of the writing is so good. Hey, how's it going? Welcome back to my channel. My name is Gabby, and today we're going to be doing a very exciting reading vlog. In this reading vlog, I'm going to be reading books that you think that I'm going to give 5 stars. I've done this video a number of times before, so I will have all the previous times linked down below. But recently, I think this was back in March, I asked on my Instagram stories and I asked on a YouTube community post if you could recommend books that you think that I'm going to give 5 stars. I really love doing these kinds of videos because I love getting recommendations directly from you, because I feel like if there's anybody in the world who knows my reading taste, it's gonna be you. It's gonna be the people that are watching my content. And I got recommended so many books, so thank you so much to everybody who took the time to recommend me a book. So some of the books in this video I'll be reading either because they got recommended the most amount of times, or maybe it's a book that I've seen get brought up again and again and I decided now is the time that it needs to happen. I also decided what I was gonna read based on availability, because some of these books I was able to get from my library. I went with some books that I was already really excited to read, and then some books that I had never even heard of before. So the first book that I got recommended the most amount of times is this book called This Book Made Me Think of You by Libby Page. And this one was not only the book that got commented the most amount of times, there was 3 separate comments that mentioned this book, but it's also a book that I had never heard of before. People mentioned this to me, and I think genre-wise this one falls into more of the literary fiction category. I actually really don't know anything about this book plot-wise, except for the fact that it's a book that's about books. And typically I do love books that are about books, so I'm kind of jumping into this one completely blind. Another book that I'm going to be reading for this video is this book called These Violent Delights. This one was left in a comment by Jem, and the way that Jem described this book, I was like, maybe I need to drop everything and read this one right now. They said, honestly, my favorite book of all time. It explores the toxic relationship between 2 boys in the 1970s who end up committing a crime together. Reminds me of a more messed up Don't Let the Forest In. If you recall, Don't Let the Forest In was my #1 favorite book that I read last year. So These Violent Delights, this is one that's kind of been on my radar, but I never really knew what it was about. So now I'm very excited to be reading this one. I was able to get the audiobook checked out from my library. Another book that I'll be reading for this video is this one called 10 Minutes 38 Seconds in This Strange World. This is one that I was able to get checked out from my library, and this one was also mentioned in my comments by Caretaker, and he said it's such a beautiful and heartbreaking story. If you need convincing to pick it up, apparently all these other YouTubers gave it 5 stars and put it on their best of the year list. So that was pretty much all of the motivation that I needed to pick up this one, and I have heard this one get recommended to me before. I think this one's been mentioned at least once or twice when I've previously done videos like this, so I was like, okay, my library has it, now is the time. Another book that I'm going to be reading in this video that I had no idea what this book was before I saw this comment is this one called How to Survive Camping: The Man with No Shadow. This recommendation was left on my Instagram, and I had no idea what this book was before I got the comment, and I've never seen this book cover before either, but I found a copy at my local Barnes & Noble, and I just love and adore how small and tiny this book is, and I was like, you know what, let's give it a go. This is one that I am a little bit nervous to read, or I feel like it might be a little bit outside of my comfort zone, because it says that this is a campy, cozy horror novel about a manager of a haunted campground. I don't always love cozy horror, but this one specifically just looked like it was gonna be so cute, so I decided to check it out for this video. And then the 5th and final book that I'll be reading for this video is going to be The Caretaker, which this one was mentioned in 2 separate comments, and this is one that I was already very incredibly excited to read, because this is from the same author as We Used to Live Here, and this one is actually my book troop book club pick for the spring, so we're gonna be having a live show discussion for this book very soon. I'll have the live show link down below, but it's gonna be happening on May 29th, and I have been dying. I have been so excited to read this new book from this author. This is one of my most anticipated horror books of the year, and it's also a 5-star prediction of mine, and so I'm really excited to read this one, and I'm desperately hoping that this one's gonna be a 5-star for me. You know, the month of May has been such an incredibly busy month for me, and I've been dealing with some pretty intense feelings of burnout lately and just not really feeling motivated and struggling with a lot of brain fog, and I was really excited to try Saffron Co because I've heard great things about what it can do to not only boost your mood but to help improve your focus. And since I've started using Saffron Co, I've been feeling a lot more excited and kind of back to my usual self and feeling a bit more balanced. What I like about Saffron Co is that it's not a caffeine pill, it's a slow burn glow up, and 91% of people feel that energy and mood boost by week 5. It's a 3,000-year-old remedy that is backed by modern clinical trials, and it's a natural way to support your mood and energy without the crash or the jitters. I'm enjoying it a lot because it helps me stay more focused when I have these long editing sessions or when I'm reading for hours at a time, and it really helps me to maintain my energy levels throughout the day. I really feel like brain fog is one of those things that you don't realize how deeply it's affecting you in your day-to-day until you try something like this that makes you feel more focused again. So you can click the link down in the description and use my code Gabby15 to get an exclusive 15% off your order. And thank you so much to Saffron Co for sponsoring today's video. And now let's get into the reading vlog. how's it going? I wanted to check in for the first update of this video because I have started reading This Book Made Me Think of You by Libby Page. As you might have seen in these previous clips, I've been staying at my sister's apartment for the last 2 nights, which was so much fun. We ended up having a really great time together. We were watching a lot of different things. Like I finally saw the Wuthering Heights movie and I have a lot of opinions about it, both good and bad. We also ended up watching Margot's Got Money Troubles together, which is a new show based off of a book that I really love, and that was really fun to watch together. And then I also started watching Widow's Bay with my sister, and this is a new show on Apple TV that has the perfect balance of horror and comedy, and I'm really enjoying it so far. And this morning I've just been laying in bed and I finally had the chance to start This Book Made Me Think of You, and I'm now on page 129. I want to say I'm about like 30 to like 35% of the way through the book. And in this story we're following this woman named Tilly, and very recently her husband Joe has recently passed away, and so this character is obviously dealing with a lot of grief, and it's very heavy right at the start of this book because she's missing her husband. We get a lot of flashback scenes to like see how they first met in the first place, which was really sweet. And we know that this character Tilly, she has a really big passion for books and she's a huge book lover, and she actually ended up meeting, her husband Joe in the bookstore. And so it does seem like books is a big part of like her identity, but also like how they became a couple in the first place. And it's really sweet because the actual premise for this book, I didn't know what the premise was, but the premise of the book is about how Tilly, she actually ends up getting a phone call from her local bookstore, and they said like, oh, an order just came in for you. And she's like, what are you talking about? Like, I didn't place an order for a book. And they were like, no, the order was placed by Joe, your husband. And she's like, there must be some kind of misunderstanding because my husband is dead. And when she goes into the bookstore, they tell her that her husband Joe, he basically like set this up before he died, that she would be getting a book from this bookstore every single month for a year. And so when she goes in the month of January, like they have her January book ready, and she's like, wait, what? And she finds out that her husband had done this for her, before he died. And so we're kind of following this character throughout these months as she's like going back to the bookstore and like getting a different book from him that he picked out for her. And it's really sweet, because at the start of this book, she's kind of talking about how she's like, I'm not a reader anymore, or like I can't get into books anymore because it honestly just like makes her sad, because like she's dealing with a lot of grief and she misses her husband, and like nothing in her life feels the same, and she doesn't have the same passion for things that she used to. So this not only feels like a story about this character like working through her grief, but it also feels like it's a story about her like finding her love for books again and like remembering who she is as a reader and like connecting with that side of herself again. It is a really beautiful synopsis. Like I think that premise is so stunning and like so thoughtful, and I can definitely see why people would recommend this book to me specifically, because I do think this feels like one of those books that's like a perfect book for book lovers, because there are so many quotes already about like the magic of bookstores. Like when she says, Tilly has always thought of bookshops as a gathering place, all those books lined up neatly on the shelves like potential friends she hasn't met yet. I really do love the way that this character talks about her like love for books and her passion for bookstores, and this main character, she also does work in publishing. So there is just so much conversation about books in this book, which I really appreciate. And it's really cool, because we do get to hear her opinions on like really popular books. Like she's already talked about Beach Read by Emily Henry, and now she's talking about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. And so it's really interesting to me that she is actually talking about like really popular fiction books. And I do really like the plot point of like her going back to the bookstore every month and like seeing which book her husband picks out for her next, because like I'm also intrigued to see which books he picked for her. But I am struggling with this book a little bit because I feel like this book is just one of those books that's like a feel-good, heartwarming kind of story, and I just don't know if this is the kind of story that I would pick up for myself these days. I don't know, I feel like my reading has changed a lot over the years, because this honestly feels like something that I would have read in high school and I would have absolutely loved. And like that was the time of my life where I was reaching for a lot of books kind of like this that have that like sappy feel to it. It almost kind of reminds me of like Nicholas Sparks or something, like kind of like The Notebook, where it's like one of those like timeless romances where like even death cannot keep them apart. And the general tone of this story is kind of sad, but also kind of like heartwarming at the same time. And I can definitely understand why this is like the perfect book for a lot of people. Like I definitely can see why. I just don't know if it's the perfect book for me, because now that we're getting into like the bulk of the story, I'm just finding it to be like, I don't know, a little bit repetitive and just kind of like okay. I mean, at this point, I don't know if I see myself giving this anything more than like 3 stars. Like I can appreciate the story for what it is. I just don't know if I'm connecting with it on a personal level. I don't really have too many plans today. Like I just got home from my sister's apartment and I finished unpacking all of my stuff. I might try to go to the gym later. I don't know. I haven't decided yet if I want to leave the house, but I don't really have anything else going on today. So I think I'm going to try to finish up the rest of this book today. it is many hours later. I did end up going to the gym, and I ended up staying on that treadmill until I finished this book. And as expected, I think I'm probably gonna give this one 3 stars, but I can definitely see why this book was so highly recommended to me, because this is a book that reminds us why books are so important and how books can bring so much adventure to our lives and kind of like inspire us to live our best lives. I love that this book was also a reminder about how important independent bookstores are, how valuable and essential they are to our communities. In a lot of ways, this book actually did remind me quite a bit of the story Life of A.J. Fikry, which is one of my favorite books of all time. Like, that's a book that I gave 5 stars. So I can definitely see how, because I enjoyed that book so much, that somebody would think to recommend me this one too. But I don't know why, I feel like I connected so much more to the characters in the story Life of A.J. Fikry, and I would actually recommend, if you read this book and you were a little bit like underwhelmed by it, I would highly recommend reading that one instead, because that book is kind of similar in the sense that like you're following a character who's like dealing with some grief in their life, and they're kind of like falling back in love with life through books. Because in the story Life of A.J. Fikry, you're following this man who owns a bookstore on this tiny little island, and this one you're also following the characters who are working in the bookstore as well. So like there is a lot of similarities between these books, but I guess I was a lot more invested in the characters and the plot in the story Life of A.J. Fikry compared to this one. I mean, don't get me wrong, I really did like Tilly as a protagonist in this book. I thought she was a really interesting character to follow, but I also think some of the book just started to get repetitive. Like, a lot of the letters from Jo were starting to feel repetitive in the way that they're always like, I hope this book reminds you that it's okay to move on with your life, and I want you to be happy, and I want you to live your life, and I want you to go to all the places we said we were gonna go, etc., etc. Like, I know I sound so heartless to say that those letters get really repetitive, but like they really did, and I think I wanted to feel more emotionally connected to Tilly and Jo than I did. And maybe it's because, at the start of this book, Jo is already dead, so maybe it's because I never really feel like I got to know him as a character, and maybe that's part of the reason why I never felt that attached to him. Like, we only really get to know him in this book through flashbacks. I don't know, I mean, like I was saying earlier, this is a book that I probably absolutely would have loved when I was in high school. I used to really gravitate towards books like this that are just really heartwarming and really sappy, and it's also the kind of book that feels like the intention of the book is to try and make you emotional. I mean, all of the words that are used on the back of this book, like charming and tender and romantic and heartwarming and life-affirming and cozy and uplifting and heartwarming, like those are all words that I would use to describe this book. There's nothing necessarily wrong with this book, and it hits all of the emotional beats that you would expect it to. I just thought it was fine. I'm giving this 3 stars. I just don't think this is the book for me. But anyway, I am glad that I finally read it, and I'm glad that I completed the first book for this reading vlog. I actually just got the audiobook checked out from my library this afternoon for These Violent Delights, so I think that's gonna be the next book that I'm gonna read in this vlog. I don't know exactly what the rest of the night holds for me, because I think I need to go home and take a shower. I'm definitely gonna be making food at the house tonight because I have so much food from every plate still in my fridge that I need to make. And then later tonight, me and my mom are probably gonna be watching more Supernatural. We're on season 14. Oh my god, we're almost done with the show. I've only watched 2 episodes of season 14 so far, and it has been not my favorite. The start of season 14 is probably like my least favorite start to the season on the show so far. So I'm hoping that season 14 improves, but I'll see you tomorrow morning when I start on the next book.
Nice, but it's only for the tips. The weather's fine, but it's nothing I would miss. My only friends are the ones I left behind. Wish I could see them just for a moment, 'cause I don't know anybody here. It's awfully lonely. I smile, but they just stare, and I see misery everywhere. It's getting to me.
Okay, hi, hello. It is now the next afternoon. This morning I ended up going to my local Value Village because last week I bought a pair of jeans here that didn't quite fit me properly, and so I wanted to exchange them to get a size up so that I can actually wear the jeans. And so I was able to find a similar pair of Levi's jeans, so I'm hoping that these ones will fit me right. And of course, like while I was there, I was just like browsing around, and I found so many cute different like t-shirts, and I found a new hoodie. I swear, like, my Value Village is incredible. Like, it's my favorite thrift store to go to because I'm always finding amazing things there. Anyway, I do have a reading update because at this point I'm now 49% of the way through These Violent Delights. I've been really enjoying myself listening to this audiobook. Like, I actually had no idea what this book was about. For some reason, I had thought that this book was a thriller, just like based off of the cover. But after starting the book, I was like, wait, what is this? And I pulled up the description, and it says that this book is The Secret History meets Lie With Me. And it says that this one is a debut novel. I think this one first published in the year of 2020. It says that this one is a feverishly taut Hitchcockian story about about two college students, each with his own troubled past, whose escalating obsession with one another leads to an act of unspeakable violence. So something that I'm loving about this book is that it's actually taking place in the 1970s in Pittsburgh, and we follow these two students at this university named Paul and Julian. And you know, Paul and Julian, they have a very interesting kind of like friendship dynamic. It's definitely one of those stories where like you can tell that they have a lot of feelings for each other, but they're also kind of like toxic. I don't know, I am loving the dynamic between these two characters. I think it's so fascinating. It says Paul sees Julian as his sole intellectual equal, an ally against the conventional world he finds so suffocating. Paul will stop at nothing to prove himself worthy of their friendship, because with Julian, life is more invigorating than Paul could have ever imagined. Julian is also volatile and cruel, and Paul becomes increasingly afraid that he can never live up to what Julian expects of him. The way that the friendship is developing between them, and like the intimacy, but then also like the toxic kind of things that are happening between them as well, it is so interesting. Just to give you an example of how beautiful the writing is in this book, it says his curiosity was ravenous, blazing in all directions like the sun. There was something mesmerizing about the way Julian moved, carelessly graceful, as if he weren't excruciatingly conscious of every atom he displaced. I also love this line when he says his was an arrogant intimacy, the kind that followed Paul home without asking. I also especially loved the way that Julian was like trying to describe love when he says it's that what we call love is actually letting your identity fill in around the shape of the other person. You love someone by defining yourself against them. It says loss hurts because there's nothing holding the part of you in place anymore, but your outline still holds and it keeps holding. The thing you shaped yourself into by loving them, you never stop being that. The marks are permanent, so the idea of the person you loved is permanent too. And then the other boy says, but I've always been shaped around you. That is romance. Part 1 of this book was an absolute 5 out of 5 for me. Like, I was eating that shit up. I loved the way that the tension was written between these two. And listen, I don't know if it's because the narrator of this audiobook is Michael Crouch, who I've talked again and again. He's like one of my favorite audiobook narrators, but he's also the same audiobook narrator as Don't Let the Forest In, aka my favorite book that I read last year. And I don't know if it's just because it's the same audiobook narrator, but like there are aspects of their dynamic that kind of remind me of the boys from Don't Let the Forest In. I mean, granted, you know, like this book, These Violent Delights, is a lot darker in theme, and like their relationship is quite a bit more toxic than the relationship in Don't Let the Forest In, because like, let's be real, those boys in Don't Let the Forest In, they are the sweetest little beans on this earth, but like there's something about it that's kind of reminding me a little bit of Don't Let the Forest In. Like, I don't know how to put my finger on that, but like even the fact that I want to compare these books at all, I think is an amazing sign, because what do you mean? That's like one of my favorite books of all time. But now that I am nearing the 50% mark through the book, I actually just hit part 3 of the book, and I will admit that part 2 I didn't love quite as much as the first part of this book, or at least I wasn't annotating it in my Kindle as aggressively as I did with part 1. I'm just so curious to see where this story goes and like what's gonna end up happening between these two, and I'm just loving the writing in this. Like, the quality of the writing is so good. It's so rich and atmospheric, and I feel like this author's just developing these characters so well. Like, I really feel like I know these two, so I am absolutely loving this one, like even more than I was expecting to, which feels so amazing. I mean, at this point I can still see myself giving this 5 stars, even though I didn't love part 2 quite as much as part 1, but like we'll just have to see where the rest of the story goes. Anyways, I am about to head back to the house. I think I might stop and pick up coffee from one of my favorite spots on the way back to the house. Hello, it is much later in the afternoon and I am home from doing all of the activities. I actually ended up going on a walk right after I got home because it's so nice out today. I mean, it is a little bit windy, but it just felt so good out there. Like, it was the perfect day to take a walk. And I just finished listening to the audiobook for These Violent Delights, and like, oh my gosh, this book was wild. Like, this was definitely more my taste because this was messy, it was queer, it was gay, it had dark academia vibes, the toxic friendship and the toxic relationship. Like, oh my god, I just ate it up. The writing was so beautiful in this book. Like, oh my god, some of these quotes that like absolutely took me out. And I feel like these quotes perfectly capture the vibes of this book. When he says, it was a relief and a horror to be known so perfectly. Oh my god, I love that. And then also this one, when he says, all they had ever been was a pair of sunflowers who believed the other was the sun. Oh my god, that's stunning. I'm really torn on how I want to rate this book because I loved these characters. Like, I absolutely loved the dynamic between Paul and Julian. It's the thing that kept me the most intrigued and like invested in this story. And I love the way that this is a story not only about like their obsession with each other, but almost the way they like negatively influence each other. It was just such an interesting dynamic to see them like really bring out these darker sides of each other. And I do tend to love books like this that are kind of about, you know, like morally gray, questionable characters, and a character getting obsessed with somebody else is like one of my favorite things to read about. It's just so fun. But I do feel like the pacing in this book was a little bit inconsistent for me because this book is 460 pages long, you know, and I don't think it necessarily needed to be quite that long, especially because this book was divided into 4 different parts. You know, part 1, if I had to rate part 1 just like by itself, that is a 5 out of 5, literally no notes, perfection. But then part 2 of the book is kind of where I started to feel like the pacing was like slowing down a little bit for me. But then part 3, it sucked me right back in, and I was really loving all of part 3. But then by the time we got to part 4, I kind of felt that like inconsistency again, where like some of it kind of felt slow. I don't know, the pacing of this book was all over the place, and that was something that I really struggled with, and like probably the main reason why I'm not going to give this one the full 5 stars. Also, like, I'm such an idiot because you know how earlier today I was like, oh my god, like this kind of reminds me of Don't Let the Forest In. Like, literally, why did I forget that that's what the original comment said on YouTube? Like, that's the reason why I added this book to my TBR in the first place, is because the comment that I had on the YouTube post literally said, this is like a darker version of Don't Let the Forest In. I mean, it's been a few weeks since I screen capped those recommendations and since I filmed the intro of this video, but still, I don't know how I forgot that. So I'm glad that I'm not the only one that's noticing the similarities to Don't Let the Forest In. I 100% agree, and I totally back that up. There is something about the writing too, like the way the writing is just so beautiful and atmospheric and like really easy to get into. It also kind of reminds me of Don't Let the Forest In. So I don't know what I want to rate this book because giving this one 4 stars doesn't feel right because I feel like I loved it even more than a book that I would typically give 4 stars. It's probably going to be closer to like a 4.5. I think that feels right for me. I mean, gosh, the fact that I just devoured this 460 page book in one afternoon, I think that alone tells you how much I was loving the writing and just like loving the story. And the dark academia vibes were there. They were so good, but I'm so impressed with the quality of writing in this book. And I'm so surprised because this is actually the only book that this author has published so far. And it's been years since this book has published. So I am just like eagerly awaiting to see if we're going to get anything new from this author because the writing was so good. And I'm not always a fan of like toxic, obsessive kind of relationships. Like, I feel like that has to be done in a very specific way for me to enjoy it because I feel like sometimes they can just get pushed a little bit too far or it can make me uncomfortable to read. Or like, I don't know, I'm definitely picky when it comes to this type of a romance, but I feel like this book did it so well. Like, one of the best kind of like toxic, obsessive romances that I've ever read. Like, truly, that was so good. So thank you so much for this recommendation because I loved this and I don't know if I ever would have picked it up on my own. And that's exactly why I love getting recommendations from you because you know my taste so well. This is exactly my taste. Anyway, it's a Friday night at the moment. I don't know what I have going on tonight. I'm probably just gonna be boring and like make food here at the house again. And then later tonight, I'll probably watch more of season 14 of Supernatural with my mom. I think I was complaining earlier that like season 14 started off so rough. Like, I really didn't like the first 2 episodes of season 14, but now we're a few more episodes into season 14 and I'm liking it a little bit more now. We just watched that episode last night that's called Mint Condition. That was a really fun kind of like silly, stupid episode, and like those tend to be my favorites on Supernatural. And I'll probably get started on the next book tomorrow.
All I want is just to have you a little bit closer. All I want you to be looking at me like you look at me. I keep telling myself it will happen eventually, and I keep holding on to my last
So good afternoon. It is now Saturday afternoon, and I have some reading updates because I actually just finished reading How to Survive Camping, The Man with No Shadow. I decided to come out here to the park today because I thought, with a book about camping and like a cozy horror novel, I thought this would be perfect to read out in the park today. And I apologize for not being able to update you sooner because when I was around the halfway point, this park got so crowded. Oh my God, I know it's a Saturday afternoon, but like there were so many people here, and I do still get a little bit shy about vlogging in public, but now that I have finished the book, the park has cleared out quite a bit. So now I can finally talk to you. I don't really know how to describe this book because it's not exactly what I was expecting it to be. Even though I'm such a big lover of the horror genre, I just don't really know how I feel about cozy horror because I feel like I've only read a few different books that I would consider to be cozy horror. And the books that come to mind when I think about cozy horror would probably be Darcy Coates, which I don't always love her books, but then also I read that one book that was called Someone You Can Build a Nest In, and that was described as like a cozy horror fantasy, and I really loved that book. And I feel like when anything gets described as being like cozy, it can be very hit or miss for me. I mean, I've really discovered that I don't typically like cozy mysteries, but then when it comes to like cozy fantasy and cozy horror, I feel like sometimes I can enjoy it, but I'm just so particular about what I like. And so I was actually really curious when this one got recommended to me because I had never heard of this book before. And I think that this one's actually the first book in a series of books that are going to be called How to Survive Camping. And so in this story, we're following this woman named Kate, and she runs this campground on this place called Goat Valley Campground. And this place has been owned by her family for generations now. The thing about their land is that the land is haunted. I actually thought the book was so funny at the beginning because it starts with this list that says rules to help you survive your camping experience. And it's this list of 10 rules that she says that she gives to all of the campers who visit there, because there are a lot of different like monsters and creatures and all these different entities that haunt the land. And so she's trying to keep people safe with her camp rules. But some of the camp rules just feel so silly. Like one of them, she says, don't follow the lights. I can't even believe I have to say this one, but do not follow the lights. And she says, you can buy ice from the children who approach your camp only if they have a wagon. Those are the children of other campers trying to make some extra spending money. But if a group of children approaches you without a wagon, do not buy ice from them. Act like they don't exist. The ice is not worth the consequences. And some of the rules are just so strange. Like when she says, if you see a group of people dancing in a circle around a fire, you may join them. If they welcome you in, dance with them until the music ends, but do not look at the musicians. If they do not welcome you, but instead stop and stare, back away slowly and then leave. If they follow you, you can try to run, but it is likely already too late. Pray that death comes swiftly. And then the last one, which kind of like ties into the title of the book, is when she says, be wary of a friendly man who may approach you in shaded areas. Try to convince him to move into the sunlight. If he casts a shadow, you can assume it's another camper. Otherwise, end the conversation immediately and leave as quickly as you can. And something that I thought was kind of cool at the beginning of this book is that this story just kind of follows this character's like day-to-day life as she's like running this campground, and she's dealing with people who like aren't following the rules, and there's like weird things happening at the camp, and she's having to take care of everything. And this book actually does manage to feel pretty cozy somehow, even though there are some gruesome and like gory things happening from time to time. But I think I struggled with this book for a few different reasons. I mean, the main one is that this main character, Kate, I just really didn't love her character. I feel like she was like really judgmental and like unsympathetic to all of the campers who were there. Like she just really didn't feel a lot of remorse if people were like dying or if people got put in a dangerous situation, because she'd just be like, well, you should have just followed my rules then. And especially in the second half of the book, I feel like she got more and more unlikable to me in a way that was like almost ruining the experience of the book for me. Like I started skimming in the second half because I was like, damn. And then also the chapters of this book were so incredibly long. I actually did hear that this book was originally on Reddit, on like the No Sleep Reddit, and that each one of these chapters were like its own separate short stories. And I feel like you can kind of tell that all of these were originally like separate short stories because it does kind of feel a little bit like inconsistent and choppy in the storytelling. It's almost like one of those stories where there's like a different monster or like a different villain almost every single chapter, so it does start to feel a little bit repetitive after a while. I mean, I will say I did enjoy learning about the different like folklore and about the different things, because all of the monsters did feel pretty unique and like different from each other, which I really enjoyed. But I also found it to be a little bit cheesy because there would be times where she would just be like talking to the monsters, like having conversations with them, and it almost kind of felt like fantasy in that way. Like one of the monsters would like warn her about something that was coming, and on the audiobook it would do this like really deep voice for the monsters that I think was supposed to be like unsettling, but it honestly just came across kind of cheesy. And not to mention too, like some of the folklore itself and like some of the monsters and some of the character decisions just like really didn't make sense to me. I was feeling kind of lost for like 60% of this story. I was like, what am I even reading right now? Like, what is going on? She was kind of describing it by saying folklore is not a tidy thing. Monsters and creatures of power don't fall neatly into categories. It is not so different from the natural world in this regard. We can look at a bird and know it's a bird, but what kind is it? And she said, similarly, was I now dealing with a spirit or a demon or a fairy or a god or something that fell into the gray area in between. I think the concept for this book is actually really cool because, you know, at the start of this, she says how she has these 10 different rules that people need to follow and how usually people won't follow the rules unless they have a story associated with it, because then they're more likely to understand like the significance of that rule. And so it is really interesting how all of the chapters of this book cover those 10 different rules, and you kind of see why those are rules to begin with. Like, I think the concept for this is really interesting, and I can definitely see why a lot of people would really enjoy this, like especially if you do enjoy cozy horror. But there was just something about it that didn't really work for me, and honestly, like, it just got really boring after a while. And like, maybe that is because of the cozy elements, like, I don't really know. I just don't feel like this is the kind of book for me. I'm probably gonna give this around like 2.5 stars. I think this is one of those books that's like better in theory, and like the concept is better than the execution of the actual story. So that is a little bit of a bummer because I was really hoping to love this one because the cover is so cute. And I know that there's another book coming out soon. I think it's like the sequel to this one, and that one also has a really cute cover. And I just love the general vibes of this, but it's unfortunate that I just really didn't click with this one. Anyway, I've spent most of my morning, you know, like just sitting here in the park, and now it's almost 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I think I'm gonna head back to the house because I do have a Patreon movie night later tonight for Remarkably Bright Creatures, which is a movie that I'm really looking forward to. It's on Netflix now, and I really enjoyed that book when I read it a few years ago, so I'm really excited to watch this movie, and I think it'll be fun to watch it with all of the friends on Patreon. Also, I wanted to update you that last night I did watch more of season 14 of Supernatural with my mom. We watched 3 more episodes, and like, bitch, tell me why I was freaking crying. Oh my god, I love Jack's character so much, and like, Jack was making me emotional in these episodes. Like, he is literally so cute. He's so precious. So I can't get enough of Jack in Supernatural. Like, it's actually the best thing ever. Anyway, I'm hoping to start on the next book for this vlog probably tomorrow, so I'll check in with you then.
You're a bullet through the door. I don't know what you're waiting for anymore. You're a bullet through the door. And I can see the damage you're making. Sure ain't faking it. You're a bullet through the door. Poem without rhyme, a birthday cake without the wishes. Everything stays the same. Beautiful words, but no one listens.
Hey, hello, it's been like 2 days since the last time that I updated this vlog. Yesterday, I ended up having a really great day with my mom. It was Mother's Day. And then this morning, I was doing some reading at the house earlier today while I was like getting a bunch of different things done. And this afternoon, I ended up coming down to one of my favorite coffee shops in Bellingham because I was meeting up with a new friend, and we ended up getting coffee and like spending some of the afternoon together. And then after I left the coffee shop, I was like, you know, it's such a beautiful day out here. So I drove down to like one of the local parks in the area that has this amazing beach. I haven't been down here in like over a year, and it was so beautiful and so nice out. By the time I got down to the beach this afternoon, I only had an hour left of this one on audio, so I decided to finish it while I was sitting on the beach. And I could not have asked for a better day because I feel like finishing this book while I was on the beach today was just exactly what I needed right now. And this book was a very powerful and very heavy kind of read. The audiobook was actually pretty quick to get through today because the audiobook was only 9 hours long. This book is just over 300 pages, and this book actually first came out in 2019. And this story is one that I've heard a lot about over the years because I think the premise for this one is just so interesting. Like, you know, it's going to be a hard, heavy-hitting book the moment you hear the premise. And this story is actually taking place in Istanbul, Turkey, which is a place that I don't think I've ever read a book that takes place in Turkey before. So that was a new experience. And at the start of this book, we're following this character named Layla. And at the start of this book, her character is murdered and she's left in a dumpster. And the premise of the story and the idea of this is that you're following this character in the 10 minutes and 38 seconds after her death. Because after she's murdered, she's still conscious and like aware of things for another 10 minutes. And you go chapter by chapter with like 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and you kind of get to see like what she's thinking about as she's dying. So clearly this is a very, very heavy premise, but I really enjoyed the storytelling in this a lot because you're not only getting, you know, these moments as this character's dying, but you're also getting a lot of flashbacks and you're kind of seeing a lot of moments from this character's childhood and like how she was raised. And like, wow, when I say you might need to check the trigger warnings on this one because there was some really heavy stuff in this book, especially with like some of these themes of like an adult taking advantage of a vulnerable vulnerable child, that stuff was really difficult for me to read and like really hard to stomach. Like there were just some really awful things that this woman went through in her life that you learn about. The quality of writing in this book was so good. It was so thought-provoking and so moving. I really loved, there was this one quote almost right in the beginning of this book when she said, "It seemed to Layla that human beings exhibited a profound impatience with the milestones of their existence. For one thing, they assumed that you automatically became a wife or a husband the moment you said I do. But the truth was, it took years to learn how to be married." And it says, similarly, society expected maternal instincts to kick in as soon as one had a child, when in fact it would take quite a while to figure out how to be a parent. And they said, ditto with retirement and old age. How could you possibly change gears the moment you walked out of an office where you had spent half of your life and squandered most of your dreams? Not that easy. And she says, perhaps it was not that different when it came to death. People thought you changed into a corpse the instant you exhaled your last breath, but things were not clear-cut like that, just as there were countless shades between jet black and brilliant white. So there were multiple stages of this thing called eternal rest. I thought that was written in a way that was so beautiful, and it really makes you think, you know? I think I'm probably going to end up giving this one 4 stars overall. I really, really, really loved the first half of this book. Like if I had to rate the first half just by itself, it would be a 5 out of 5 for me. I think I really connected with the first part of the story because it's almost entirely told, you know, from Lila's point of view. And you're kind of like learning about her childhood and like learning about what happens, you know, right after she dies. And you kind of get to hear about how she met these 5 friends that are like her closest friends. But then the second half of the story kind of like changes perspective in a way because you're actually reading from the perspective of her 5 friends after they discover her body. And don't get me wrong, like that section of the book was also very moving and very powerful, but there were parts of it that I thought were a little bit slow paced. But then the ending came back very strong, and I really, really loved the epilogue of this book so much. And I also really appreciated the author's note that was included at the end of this book that was kind of talking about like the different things that inspired this story and which things were actually true about different moments in Turkey's history, you know, because this book is actually taking place in like the 1960s. So there were a lot of things mentioned in the history of Turkey that were real that was really interesting to learn about. But I definitely preferred the first half of this book. Like I thought that was the strongest part of the book for me. And then the second half of the book, if I had to rate that second part of it, I would probably give it more like a 3.5 stars. So I think a 4 stars overall feels right for me. But I'm really glad that I finally read this one because I've been curious about it for a long time. So thank you so much for this recommendation. This was definitely a hard-hitting and heavy story, but it was also such a beautiful story. And it's just one of those stories that like really makes you think about your life. It has been a couple of days, I think, since the last time that I updated this vlog. Yesterday, I ended up going out and getting coffee from one of my favorite coffee shops because it was just pouring rain yesterday. And the day before, we actually had a little bit of a thunderstorm, like really late at night at like 11:30. I saw a flash in my windows, and then a second later, I heard really loud thunder. And it was crazy because it only happened the one time, but it was so nice. And so yesterday, because it was pouring rain, I was like, you know, I just want to go and pick up an iced coffee from one of my favorite spots and just spend the day like reading in bed. So yesterday, I started reading The Caretaker, and I got about 110 pages into it. I didn't end up reading anything more though last night because I ended up going over to my sister's apartment and she was making mac and cheese. And I do want to jump back into reading this book, but I wanted the chance to update you about how I'm feeling about it first because oh my god, this author Marcus, he's doing it again. I am loving this so much. I just recently hit part 2 of the book, and part 2 does feel like the story's changing just a little bit. And like if I had to rate part 1 like just by itself, that would so be 5 out of 5 stars. Like I've really been loving part 1 of this book, and I would actually recommend, if you know nothing about like the general synopsis of this book, I wouldn't really look into it because there's something that happens kind of like towards the beginning of this book that I thought was so shocking and kind of like interesting, and it was not mentioned at all in the blurb or like in the description of this book. And so that's really cool. Like I love when an author is able to keep the description so vague, and so there's a lot of like little things that surprise you still. But what I really like about this book is that we're following this character named Macy. You know, most of the story's taking place in the Pacific Northwest, in Oregon specifically, and Macy's kind of put in a really difficult situation because she has the financial burden for like not only herself but also for her younger sister, who she's currently the guardian of her younger sister who's only 17, and her name is Gemma. And so like she's not only trying to like, you know, provide for herself, but she's also trying to provide for her sister. And she's kind of talking about how she's been in a really difficult spot lately with like finances, and she's really struggling to find a job. And so one day she gets this interview for a job that she applied for that was basically like an ad on Craigslist that was to be like a caretaker for this elderly man. And so she's really surprised that she she gets an interview because she doesn't really have a lot of experience in this field, but she goes to the interview anyway, and she learns something really eerie and really weird during this interview process, but she's like, you know what, like I need this job, and they're offering her a lot of money to do this. And so she decides to take this weird ass job in this weird ass house that's kind of like a mansion. Like she talks about how the house is like really big and how these people seem really rich, but it just seems like there's something off about the situation. It's really cool too because the book actually started with a prologue that was from the perspective of this guy David, who is like the elderly character that she's going to be, you know, taking care of in this book. And that prologue chapter was so freaky and so disturbing. I feel like this one's gonna have a lot of horror tropes that I personally really love, and like ones that I really personally get freaked out by. And I just love how the description of this book gives absolutely nothing away. Like it doesn't tell you anything. I chose this book to be a BookTube book club just because of how much I loved We Used to Live Here, and because I see something so special with this author and the way that he writes horror. I just knew that this one was gonna be right up my alley. And I'm so glad that for the most part, I've been absolutely correct because I've been loving this so much so far. Like this definitely feels like it's going to be a 5-star. At this point, I'm nearly halfway through the book because I think I'm like 43% of the way through the audio, and the audiobook is really good as well, by the way. So let's hope that we do have a 5-star read on our hands because I desperately need one for this video.
I'm getting lost in the commotion and the sound is way too loud. 'Cause I'm not the city girl I thought I was. This town is bigger than the ocean and too small to fit the crowd. 'Cause I'm not the city girl I thought I was. No, I'm not a city girl. No.
Okay, hello, it has been many hours and I wanted to update you because I have finished reading The Caretaker. I have so many thoughts about this book, and I'm actually really glad that I decided to make this one a BookTube book club pick because I do think that this one is going to make for a really interesting discussion, but I don't think this was the perfect 5-star for me. I'm actually like sitting here thinking like, man, what am I going to rate this book? Like, I don't know how I feel about it. I think this one is actually going to land somewhere between like a 3.5 and a 4-star for me, which like, yes, that is pretty upsetting that I didn't love it quite as much as I was expecting to. I don't think I enjoyed this one as much as I loved We Used to Live Here, and that's for like a few different reasons. But what I will say about this book is that it is so readable. It's only 290 pages long and it is such a quick read. There would be so many moments where I was just like, oh my god, like I couldn't put it down. I thought this story was really interesting, and I also forgot to mention in my first update that like I loved the sister relationship in this. Her younger sister Gemma, she's the one who's only like 17, and she was one of the best characters for sure. Like she was such a standout. She had so many lines in this book that was like making me laugh so hard. And as an older sister, I just really connected with our main character Macy, and like her willingness and like her need to protect her younger sister was something that I really related to. There's also a lot of talk in this book about, you know, like mental illness and anxiety and depression and even like suicidal thoughts and like some pretty dark stuff in here. There was a content warning at the beginning of this book that was kind of talking about the different themes that are being explored in this book, so I would definitely take note of that if that's something that you need a warning about, because some of the themes of depression were really dark in this book, and there were some aspects of this book that I really, really loved. I think in general, the idea behind this book is so fascinating. Like I had no idea what this book was actually going to be about, and so I would jump into this book knowing as little as possible, because once you actually do start to get an idea for what's happening in this book, it is just so bonkers, cuckoo bananas, and I love that about this. I think this author is so good at writing horror that is just genuinely so creepy, especially if you hate the idea of like something watching you and something that's not exactly human, things that are like unnaturally tall or like you can only see a shadowy figure. Oh my god, like this is the book for you. This is the author for you. Those are things that definitely freak me out. There were just so many elements of horror that I personally loved in this so much, but then there were a few aspects of this story that like, I don't know, it started to get a little bit repetitive for me, or it started to feel a little bit cheesy for me, especially in the second half. And I did think there were a few things in the plot that I found to be a little bit predictable. Like I guess I just wanted things to be a little bit more shocking in the second half of the book, because I do think once it starts to follow like a very specific formula, it does start to get a little bit repetitive. So this one's probably going to be like a 4-star for me. I mean, maybe like a 3.75 if we're getting like very, very specific. But either way, I'm so glad that I finally read this book, and this author like continues to write horror that just like really excites me, because the horror in this book was so well done. It was so creepy. It was so weird. And that brings us to the end of this reading vlog. You know, I am a little bit bummed that I didn't find a 5-star in this video. I mean, that could be for one of two reasons. Like maybe I was just picking the wrong books for this video, but also maybe I am a little bit more stingy with my 5 stars these days. I don't know. I mean, we got really close because These Violent Delights was like a 4.5 stars for me. Like, I really, really loved that book. And I really enjoyed most of the stuff that I was reading for this video. I just didn't end up finding any new 5-star favorites, which sucks, but it's okay. I really love doing these videos anyway. Like, I love any time that I can get recommendations from you for books that you think that I would enjoy. I think that's a really fun thing for me to do, even if I don't always find a new 5-star favorite, that's okay. But thank you so much for watching. As always, you'll have to let me know your thoughts if you've read any of these books that I tried reading in this video. Let me know what you think of them. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and I'll see you very soon with another video. Bye.